And I must confess, folks, even I was taken in. And yet, by the time Good Morning Britain was aired earlier on today, Jeremy Corbyn said that for access to the single market, he would accept the freedom of movement of people. They tried to rebrand him. They tried to change him. But I guess in many ways, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. He believes we're all world citizens. He believes in open borders. So I really do believe that that final nail has been driven into Labour's electoral coffin. That's my view. The question I want to ask you is this Labour leader taking this party towards electoral disaster? And given that he looks like a kindly history teacher on the verge of retirement, still hanging on to his old university views, which he thinks are trendy, what marks out of 10 do you give Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party? But that's enough from me. As I said last night, it's all about you. It's about you getting involved. It's about you calling. It's about you texting. It's about you tweeting. And I will try to give as many of you as I possibly can over the course of the next hour the chance to have your say. You may well agree with me that Labour is finished, that perhaps somebody else may come along and replace them. Or perhaps you think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you may be one of those 300,000 people that has joined the Labour Party since Corbyn announced he was running for leader a couple of years ago. And we're going to go tonight to our first caller, who is Lisa in Cricklewood. Lisa, is Labour doomed under Corbyn?
Certainly not, no. I think Corbyn is one of the few politicians who speaks for ordinary people. He thinks about things deeply. He cares about people deeply. And I think he will develop policies that will help ordinary people. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, Mr. Farage, I wanted to ask you that today Jeremy Corbyn suggested a maximum pay cap, or certainly some way of stopping the huge inequality in pay that has occurred in this country. And as a self-styled man of the people, I'd like to wonder whether you support an idea that would stop bosses like Philip Green and their outrageous behaviour.
Well, I certainly think, Lisa, that when it comes to the pay gap, I mean, we're looking a few years ago, you know, bosses generally earned something like 30 or 40 times what the average shop floor worker earned. They're now earning something like 120, 130 times what the average worker earns. So there is a massive problem here. Is capping pay to any company that receives public contracts the answer? I don't think it is. I don't think state-managed economies in that way are ever very efficient, and people find their way around them. Lisa, what I would like to see are two things. The first thing I'd like to see, and I think we're beginning to see it, is more shareholder activism. You know, people actually turning up at AGMs and saying, look, this is outrageous. You know, how can the top 2 or 3 people keep taking up more and more, keep paying themselves, as it was last year, an average extra 10%, when that's not really helping ordinary workers? That's the first thing. But the second thing, Lisa, is fundamental here, and it's this. You know, we are now living in an age of global corporatism, where the giant corporates, the big businesses and the big banks and the politicians are frankly all in bed together, and nowhere exemplifies that better than where I am right now, here in Brussels, where over 75% of our commercial law has been made over the course of the last few decades. And Lisa, what I want to do is I absolutely want to smash up and use Brexit as the opportunity to stop the big guys from totally dominating the rule book and putting out of business their small and medium-sized competitors. I want to give men and women who want to give things a go and set up their own businesses a chance and a break, and I want to reduce mass immigration so that we can see average wages going up. But let me ask you a question. What is it that you think about Jeremy Corbyn that means that he connects with ordinary people so that they will go out and vote for him in 2020? I mean, yes, you said he's caring, and I get that, but that isn't enough, is it? What's his connection to Labour voters?
I think his connection is to Labour voters, and hopefully to many more voters, is that he talks about things people actually care about. So he talks about the fact that people are working 40-hour plus weeks and still not able to feed their families, that people do not have homes to go to, and that our children, the next generation, are to be honest, in my eyes, doomed unless we turn around a system. The taxation system only works for the rich. The housing system only works for the rich. And he's, as far as I'm concerned, he's the only politician, one of the few politicians in this country who is addressing any of those issues that directly affect every normal family in this country.
But many Labour voters, a lot of them, and certainly in that referendum, they turned out and said that they thought...
I think the truth is that this government pledged for the last 6 years to control immigration, and they haven't. And even the parts of immigration they can control, such as non-EU, I think overall immigration is good for this country. I don't fall for the message you send, which is that immigration is bad, that immigration doesn't make the next door neighbour poor. It's the policies of this government, it's austerity, it's all the... Sorry. It's all the
is that a supporter or not?
Yeah, they definitely support me. No, it's all the policies, it's all the policies
it's all right.
that the government put forward, not because I happen to have an immigrant living next door to me. That's not making me poor. That's not stealing my housing. A government needs to provide housing. A government needs to make sure that people can go to work for 40 hours a week and earn enough money to live on. Not because... But Lisa,
a government can't possibly plan for how many houses need to be built when you have an open-door immigration policy and you've absolutely no idea, within the nearest couple of 100,000, how many people net will settle next year. I completely respect your visa, but I would point this out to you, that a recent opinion poll, when people were asked would they prefer to have an Australian-style point system for immigration into Britain, only 18% in the country opposed it. I wonder what Sam in Flintshire thinks. Sam, good evening. Do you think that Corbyn is taking Labour towards doom? And how many marks out of 10 would you give him as Labour leader?
Good evening, Nigel. It's brilliant to be talking to you. As a young person who seemed to be Corbyn's target demographic, I think he's been a travesty as Labour leader. I think that his points on immigration, things in terms of the way he's handled the party, have been absolutely awful. And honestly, I'd be tempted to give him a 2 or a 3 out of 10 in terms of his...
A 2 or a 3?
Yeah.
So do you think he... I mean, could he recover, in your view, between now and 2020, or is Labour doomed?
I don't think that the Labour Party is doomed, because I think that it's so ingrained into the national political conscious that it's going to be really hard to dig out a force as big as that. And I do think that if he were to step down before 2020, even before the end of the year, as some people, especially the union leaders, have been suggesting recently, I think that they could recover. And I do think that they could make a challenge to the Tories. But I think as things stand, and if Corbyn remains as leader, he has so much baggage in his political career. No matter how principled you think he is, a lot of the things that he says are widely unpopular, especially in terms of foreign policy. I think that the Labour Party...
Do you mean Hamas and all that sort of business, yeah?
Yes, and things to do with the Falklands especially. That's quite a bitter memory for a lot of people still.
Yes.
And I think it's going to be very difficult for him to turn that image around. But I do think that if they were to replace him with, I think, Andy Burnham, I've heard someone say quite recently, to me...
Well, no, because Andy Burnham is about to step down from his League constituency and try to become the mayor of Manchester. And given what a safe Labour area that is, Burnham will be, in the summer of this year, the mayor in Manchester. Now, I suppose Boris could argue that he was mayor of London and tried to run for many other things, but it's quite difficult to see how Burnham... unless the Labour leadership election came quickly, difficult to see how Burnham could stand and do that. But Sam, you think he's a disaster, and you give him just, a 2 or 3 out of 10. I wonder what Alistair in Rugby thinks about Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party. Are they doomed, and how many marks out of 10, Alistair?
Good evening, Nigel. It's great to be on. I'd probably give him a solid 1 after watching. I started off with, when he became leader in 2015, as respecting him for a man of principle, even if I didn't necessarily agree with his views. But now, after today, his wedded on the comments of being not wedded to freedom of movement, and then going ahead and saying, "I've not changed my mind on the immigration. Freedom of movement is good." I don't see how that man can call himself principled, and I feel like he has a fundamental misunderstanding of economics. He thinks that a maximum wage scheme is going to have any sort of success. And even Tim Farron understands that is not economically...
Wow. That is saying something, isn't it? But it really is. Well, Alistair, thank you. And tell me, how many marks out of 10, Alistair?
1, maybe 2 at a push.
1, right. That's a pretty low estimate. Thank you. Well, your tweets coming in. Nigel, if big business worked along the same lines as Waitrose and John Lewis, who share the profits among all staff, there would be fairer pay, which I think is a pretty reasonable way of looking at it. Another one, fixed pay ratios will tackle inequality but not curb success. What's Farage's solution to inequality? Something to do with foreigners. There we are. A real dig right at the end there. I'll answer it afterwards, but I have to ask you, has this relaunch today put the final nail in the coffin for Labour electorally? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. It's 7:15. Well, today's rebrand for Corbyn has been a disaster in my view. Last night we were told he was getting tough. He would say that Labour was not wedded to free movement. By breakfast television this morning, he appeared to contradict that. But luckily for all of us, this afternoon he gave a clarification statement, and let me read it to you word for word. He said, "We're not wedded to freedom of movement as a point of principle, but I don't want to be misinterpreted, nor do we rule it out." Does that make sense to you? Does that make things any clearer? I did on the back of that tweet out that if you think the Prime Minister was confusing yesterday over the single market, Corbyn's positioning on immigration is even more intriguing. The truth is, they tried to rebrand him. They tried to make him recognise that Labour voters do think that immigration and the impacts of it are the most important thing to Labour voters in this country. And when it came to it, he simply refused to jump the fence. So I'm asking you, has his relaunch today put the final nail in the coffin for Labour? And how many marks out of 10 do you give him as leader of the Labour Party? And some text coming in. Hi, Nigel. Corbyn wants to take us to Russia circa 1917, says Kat. A Corbyn government would turn the UK into an economic twilight zone, a Marxist fantasy island. His ideas are so full of loopholes, they defy logic, common sense, are unworkable and unenforceable. Corbyn should stick to making jam, says Richard in Chelsea. Gosh, I feel quite low-key compared to some of those. So is this headed for disaster? And what happens? I mean, the Labour vote right now is on 24%. And I know we take opinion polls with a pinch of salt. But in modern history, their lowest ever was 23% under Michael Foot back in 1983, which incidentally is the year that Jeremy Corbyn came into the House of Commons. And that was when there was an SDP. That was when there'd been quite a major fracture, quite a Labour split. Now, that hasn't happened. You could argue that UKIP have taken a couple of million, maybe 2.5 million Labour voters, but 24%, that's what they're on, and they're probably on course now to head down towards 160, 170 seats in the House of Commons, but I don't think Labour's reached the bottom. But I wonder what Peter in Manchester thinks. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel. Can I just say, first of all, that when I was chairman of the South Thanet Conservative Association, I voted for you in the general election, which was the only time I ever crossed the Rubicon for someone else.
Oh, gosh, did they expel you or do something terrible to you?
Well, I was just honest and honourable. I'm a northerner from a working-class background. I was at Manchester Grammar, you were at Dulwich, very similar schools, world-class education. Mr. Corbyn doesn't even know where the Wigan Pier is, let alone represent it. And I believe that the way that the Brexit vote went, and it's very, very important to this, is that I campaigned extensively throughout the whole campaign, is that honourable people from all walks of life, from all political parties, especially in the north, voted not just for freedom from Europe, but to make Westminster responsible and accountable to the people of the United Kingdom. And that is what I think is the greatest challenge we have at this point in time. I've worked for 30-odd years, registered blind within the Conservative Party as a politician, and to make government accountable. But I believe...
Well, it needs to be, Peter.
It needs
to be, Peter. You know, and of course, if it's making our own laws again, it will be more accountable, because when people vote, they'll care a bit more, perhaps, who their MP is.
Well, at the end of the day, I remember listening to Jacob Rees-Mogg at the Oxford Union saying that over 60% of our laws were in the competence of the European Union, which is completely and utterly unaccountable. I'm an ex-soldier, and we fought to give people freedom. And the freedom that the British people gave to Europe has now been denied to the British people because of the European Union.
But we have voted, Peter, to get it back, and we talked last night about some of the frustration. Well, we talked last night about some of the frustrations, but I mean, you're a Conservative supporter, but a Brexiteer. I mean, is Corbyn doing as badly with that Labour vote in Manchester where you live as I think?
Well, Mr. Corbyn is not a bad man in any shape or form. He's just completely out of his depth. Is not a Napoleon or a Snowball in Animal Farm. Is a piglet somewhere else, and it's a real shame. He's a man who means well, but we actually have very, very few people with the caliber to have political leadership in our nation at this point in time.
Well,
and
I think Peter. I think the Labour Party is really struggling for that, and I must say, but I do agree with one thing with you. I mean, Corbyn is never particularly rude about anybody. He's never, from what I can see, backbiting or playing games. I do agree, Peter. I think there is a sincerity about this guy, which is why I sort of compared him at the start to a sort of kindly history teacher who's going to retire at the end of the next summer term. They've got that sort of old dog's tooth jacket and leather patches on the elbows, but views that are 40 years out of date that he still thinks are sort of kind of trendy, and perhaps in Islington they are. But what I'm really saying tonight is I think he is, after today's attempted rebrand that has gone wrong, I think he is further away from old Labour than he's ever been, and I don't believe that it's salvable. But I wonder what Joshua in Huddersfield, another strong Labour area, what does Joshua think?
Evening, Nigel. Well, I am one of the 300,000 who joined the Labour Party 2 years ago to vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay,
and
yep.
For the reasons I voted for him, I'm going to have to give him a 10 out of 10. Because I think he's done an absolutely splendid job of making the Labour Party in every way completely unelectable. And I was listening to James O'Brien this morning, and I heard what he said about the maximum wage, and I'm thinking to myself, like, goodness me, can it get any worse? And I get back. I was in University Library all day, and I get back about less than an hour ago, and I hear that he's come out with this rubbish about the levels of immigration are not too high at all. And
That's right.
I couldn't believe it. I, honest to God, could not believe it. And
yes, he was asked, Joshua, he was asked the question by Laura Kuenssberg. He was asked a very simple question. Does he think that the current levels with 190,000 EU citizens net coming to the UK last year are too high? And he responded, no. Well, at least he's being honest, wasn't he?
It's balmy. I mean, it's like the way I see it, he's basically trading the traditional working class vote, the massive block of votes in the North, Midlands and Wales, for like a really small niche group of far leftist students, socialists and lecturers, and it's like buying a quid for £1,000. It's ridiculous. And people talking about
Joshua, tell me.
Yeah.
Joshua, you were one of the third of a million people who got caught up in Corbyn mania, and you paid your £3 or whatever it was to join the Labour Party. Are you going to renew?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. £1, I'm a student,
right.
Nigel. I get to join for £1. It's brilliant.
You get, do you? Right. So you're enjoying paying your £1 to see Labour do badly, but to stick to intellectual purity. Is that what it is?
Oh, in a way. But I mean, people are saying he's talking about what people want to talk about. I mean, if he really wants to know what people are talking about, I think he needs to start going postal. But it's all a bit up in the air with me. I can't get his mentality. He's contradicting himself.
Joshua, you are a delightful contrarian, and it is the first 10 out of 10 that Corbyn has got tonight. But not for success, but for absolutely guaranteeing failure in 2020. And that from somebody who's a paid member of the Labour Party. Work that out if you can. I enjoyed it. I wonder what Coco in Southwark thinks about Corbyn's progress, and how many marks out of 10, Coco, would you give Jeremy Corbyn?
Hi. Well, I'd actually like to ask about something a little bit different, if that's okay.
Oh, right. OK. Well, we haven't got all evening, but try me quickly.
Sure. So Nicola Sturgeon has said that she wants to remain in the single market, but Theresa May has recently announced that she doesn't think that we will. Are you prepared to see Scotland leave after 300 years of being part of the UK?
I think the sooner we call Nicola Sturgeon's bluff, the better. Nicola Sturgeon does not support independence. She does not support independence. She supports separation from the United Kingdom and to become effectively a region of the European Union, a small, insignificant little country with very little say. And that was teased out over the course of the last two referendums that Scotland's had in the last 3 years. The opinion polls in Scotland are... Well, they're not going to go. And in fact, the margin to stay with the United Kingdom would now be significantly greater than it was in the referendum.
I mean, she has said that she's going to hold a referendum, and considering that...
I hope she does. Bring it on. Bring it on. Let's smash this ridiculous idea.
To remain in the EU, I find it highly unlikely that they're going to remain in the UK, because I wouldn't.
Well, I tell you what, the whole of Scotland didn't vote to remain in the European Union. Slightly over 60% did, but it's very interesting. There's been a real lack of debate in Scotland on the European Union issue because they've been so tied up discussing whether they should separate from the United Kingdom. I do not fear Scotland leaving the European Union as a result of Theresa May, hopefully, I pray, doing her job and taking this country out of a single market. I am not concerned about it one little bit. It ain't going to happen. It's for the birds. And Nicola Sturgeon can talk about it all she likes. I'd love to see someone, frankly, Coco, call her bluff. Well, has this relaunch today put the final nail in the coffin for Labour? Different views, not much support for Corbyn coming. I'm listening, I'm waiting. Come and tell me he is the saviour and the salvation of Labour. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:30. So we get the briefing last night that there's going to be a big change of policy direction, that Corbyn is going to say, no, we're not wedded to the freedom of movement of people, and by Breakfast TV this morning, it's changed. Why, you might ask? Well, I've got some experience of leading a political party full of people who have very strong views. And when you try and change the direction of the party, what happens is about 3 people contact you to say you're very brave and bold, and this is the right thing to do. And about 3,000 contact you to say, we don't want our policies ever, ever, ever to change. And remember, this man, who I've already called tonight decent, although I've compared him to a sort of likeable, elderly, kindly history teacher, but likeable, honest and decent. He has been a backbench member of Parliament since 1983. He has never held any position of authority. He's been one of the great Labour rebels, and I suspect that leading a party and coming under this huge internal pressure, and I know what it's like, you turn the phone off at midnight, it's ringing, you switch it back on at 5 o'clock, and within 10 seconds, it's ringing again. That is what it's like, and I think whatever they tried to do, Corbyn and his team, to try to put this reband in place, they got a bit of pressure, and they've reverted back to type. And people, I have to say, on social media, people really aren't very impressed. If I was getting pro-Corbyn tweets and texts, I would be reading them out. But I mean, this one, Corbyn is bad at politics. Going against free movement at this point is a win-win, as it steals votes from Tory and UKIP. Well, in a way, that's right. Jeremy Corbyn, in political fortitude terms, is miles behind where the British people are. He always makes the wrong choice. And I do myself genuinely think that this was the chance for him to change things, albeit immigration is one of many issues, and I get that, but for so much of the old Labour vote, it is absolutely the issue, and it's what drew them away from their party when they went against the official position and they voted for Brexit. And I sense there is now quite a big gap opening up in the UK political market, which I think, before long, somebody might just fill. So please tell me, do you think that Corbyn is dooming the Labour Party? And how many marks out of 10 would you give him? I wonder, David in Romford, how many marks out of 10 would you give Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party?
Out of 10, 2, 3. I think he's a bit of a disaster, to be honest. although having said that, he's got his heart in the right place. The unfortunate thing is he has no policy savvy. I was never really a fan of yours, to be honest.
Well, that's all right.
I warned everybody about you.
Right.
I did warn everybody about this guy. That was way back when you were coming out with your. I said, this is a conviction politician. Doesn't matter what you think about what he's saying. The guy's convicted about what he believes in, but he's ahead of the curve. That was the first thing. But as far as Corbyn is concerned, the reason why Corbyn's going to get nowhere is because he's not clever with his politics. Let's take, for example, this thing about not wanting to prevent the capping wages at the top. How ridiculous! I don't believe that these rich guys, in particular, why did he use footballers, for example? Stupid talking about footballers. Anybody could become a footballer, so that was pointless. What he should have done was said and introduced, and the clever politician that does this is going to get a serious amount of support, introduce cooperatives of the like of John Lewis. That way, you prevent wage disparity. And, it never becomes an issue. It will never become an issue again. That means that you can be as rich as you want, but bring your workforce with you.
I love that, David, and you're dead right. And the problem here with Corbyn, and so much of the hard old left, is they are intent on punishing people rather than on encouraging and rewarding people. It's all the wrong way around. David, I agree with you. The first caller at the top of the hour made much the same point, that we've got, organisations like John Lewis, Waitrose, we've got people doing share options and share schemes. And I agree with you, David, that's the way forward. But really the way forward is we have to lift the burden of regulation that is on our small and medium-sized businesses that's been encouraged by the big banks and the big businesses, with all the major UK political parties supporting it, and with this place where I am in Brussels actually being sort of almost the temple of regulation. We have to give ordinary folk a chance and a break. David gave him between 2 and 3 out of 10. The only 10 out of 10 I've had was, I suspect, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I wonder what Joshua in Farnham thinks and how he would rate Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party.
Hello, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I think it's quite tricky to say because there's no question he's disillusioned thousands of Labour members across the country, old Labour voters who, I guess, their social attitudes about immigration and the European Union are more closely aligned to UKIP's than your view on that.
Yes.
But I think it's tricky because at the moment we have first past the vote, first past the post, our electoral system. And with that, it really only allows a two-party system. And it's going to be so difficult for other parties such as UKIP to really break through in those safe Labour seats in the north. If it's the final nail in the coffin, I'm not really sure because are Labour going to lose hundreds of seats when we've got this current voting system? If we reformed our voting system, which is so dearly needed because first past the post is completely broken, then perhaps it would be.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I'm not.
Well, Joshua, you've made the point of the evening. You're absolutely right. Nobody knows more about the iniquities of the first past the post voting system than I do. Because in 2014 in the European elections, UKIP gets 4.5 million votes. We win. We're the first party, for over 100 years to win a national election, not being Labour or Tory, and I'm a hero. And a year later, we get 4 million votes and we get 1 seat. And I'm a complete tragedy and a failure and a disaster. So I get it. Let's put it like this, Joshua. The only party I think that could challenge Labour in some of these seats is UKIP. And if you look at seats like, for example, Hartlepool, where UKIP weren't far behind. You look at seats like Hayward and Middleton, where UKIP got within 600 votes of Labour in that by-election. So there is, I think, a chance that UKIP could take a number of seats from Labour at the next election. But given first past the post, given the class-based voting system that we've got, that is just about the only thing that could stop Labour from complete meltdown and disaster. But you know something, Joshua? I kind of thought that in Scotland 10 or 12 years ago. I kind of thought that Labour were in a bit of trouble, that it was pretty clear that Alex Salmond was connecting with a very large number of Scottish people, came across as a very personable guy, a conviction politician. And I thought, yeah, but actually, because of the first past the post system, Labour will hang on to a good number of seats in Scotland. One of the days I'm pleased I didn't go down to the bookmakers, because look what happened. And don't think, just because a party has been around for 100 years, that it necessarily will be around in 10 years' time. And I feel, myself, Joshua, I feel that the Labour Party doesn't really know what it's for, or who it's even trying to represent anymore. So I take all your points. I take all your points about first past the post, but I do think it's in real trouble. How many marks out of 10 do you give him, Joshua?
Oh, I'll give him 4 for success, but I'll give him 7 or 8 for principle.
Very good. Thank you. Excellent. I wonder what James in Haringey thinks. James, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Big fan of yours. Great to speak to you for the first time.
Very sweet of you. What about Corbyn then? Is he succeeding? Is he failing?
For me, he's succeeding, but what I mean by that is he's succeeding in making Labour completely unelectable, which I think is wonderful. But
so is he a 10 out of 10 for failure with you then?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But the point I wanted to make is I actually want to take issue, and I understand why you, as a politician, you have to say this. You have to say that, your opponents, they're good people or whatever. But more generally, that public perception of Jeremy Corbyn as being a nice guy, I actually have to take issue with that. I don't think he is a nice guy. If you read the things he said, and if you look at his behaviour since he became Labour leader, and the people he surrounds himself with, and the people he's always associated with, these are not the characteristics of a nice man. There's a ton I could use, but I'll mention just 3 examples. One is, and I know this will really, really upset the Corbynista fans listening. One is the epidemic of anti-Semitism we saw last year, where he didn't take any action for about 3 or 4 months, and then when he finally did...
James, I get the point. I'm going to have to hurry you on the next 2.
Okay. Well, and the fact that we know he called Hamas and Hezbollah his friends. He held a minute's silence in the 80s for IRA bombers who'd been killed in the process of killing innocent people. And he stood on platforms with Islamist fanatics. These are not the characteristics of a decent man, as people like to keep saying.
James, points very well made indeed. And I will, before the end of the programme, tell you what I really think about Jeremy Corbyn, and what I think is even worse for him than his total reluctance to take on the immigration issue. So the question we're asking is, has Corbyn's relaunch today put the final nail in the electoral coffin for Labour? And also, how would you score him out of 10? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. It's 7:45. At the top of the hour, I will tell you what Corbyn's real Achilles heel is. It's not just the immigration question. It's deeper and more fundamental than that. But I'm asking you, Corbyn's relaunch today, has it put the final nail in the coffin for Labour? And how many marks out of 10 do you give him as leader of the Labour Party? And I'm asking that first to Christian in Norwich. Christian, what do you think?
Evening, Nigel. It's absolutely a pleasure to be talking to you. Firstly, I would say I would give him a half out of 10. 0.5.
Half out of 10.
Right. No, 0.5, sorry. Mainly because his comments this morning show that the Labour Party are completely dismissive of voters' concerns outside of the M25, and that they're in this Islington bubble that immigration is fine. They're completely ignoring the result of the referendum. People clearly voted for a control on immigrations. People say he is an honest bloke. People say he's a respectable bloke. That may be the case, but the views, what he is putting forward and what he believes in, are not compatible with the 21st century.
Yes, he's kind of missing it, isn't he? Brexit, Trump, the rise of different politics all over Europe and the Western world, and he's still firmly stuck, isn't he? Deeply stuck in the past. He's talked in the past about us all being sort of world citizens. He doesn't seem to really have much of a sense of nationhood, Christian, does he?
No, not at all. It's completely dismissive in phrases. It seems to be this: if you vote Leave, if you vote for controls on immigration, particularly on the left, from people on the left, you are deemed racist.
So absolutely, and they've tried to do this for years, but I think we've gone past that now, to be absolutely honest with you. But Christian, where do these Labour votes go? Do they stay at home? Do they go to another party? What do you think happens to them?
I think potentially there are going to be a lot more votes for UKIP. In the next election, I would currently be inclined to do so, mainly because I'm concerned with Theresa May's stance. I'm hoping we come out of the single market because, quite frankly, a soft Brexit would be pointless. There would be no control of immigration. And we'd remain under EU law.
Well, let's let's see. But I do agree with you. I do think UKIP's got some great opportunities. And certainly in any election that's coming up where there is an element of proportional representation, UKIP is going to do phenomenally well. But if UKIP was to get 6 million votes in 2020, I'm just not sure whether that means they win 5 seats or 35 seats. Very, very difficult to tell. There is an electoral threshold that UKIP has not yet got through. If it's able to do that, it could surprise everybody. What I would say from a UKIP perspective is Mr Corbyn is making their lives very much easier indeed. More texts and tweets coming in. I can't understand why everyone else calls Corbyn honest when he blatantly lied about not being able to find a seat on a train to try to gain support for his policies. Ian in Hornchurch. I've got to say, Ian, it's a fair cop. You got him there. I was just trying to be generous and nice, as I am so often. I wonder what Richard in Pembroke Dock thinks about Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party and what direction that party will take under him. Richard, good evening.
Well, I would actually give him 8.5, to be honest. I'm a little bit ambivalent about the guy, although I do like a lot of things he says about the NHS and so on. But he's in a really hard place, He's in a really difficult situation. It's not, as you said earlier, it's not easy being the leader of a party, No,
it isn't. No, it isn't. But 8.5, Richard.
Especially
it's a big score,
8.5. When you've got 231 members of Parliament underneath you. I mean, you didn't have that problem, of course, but I did want to offer you my condolences about Paul Nuttall's crash earlier. I hope he gets better soon. Sorry, say again?
This is news to me, Richard. He literally, about 7 or 8 minutes ago, walked past me. And so what crash was he in? Tell me.
Well, he sent out a tweet earlier saying that he wants the United Kingdom to come out of the single market. But he wants...
Quite right. Here.
Tariff-free access to it. Well, that's a car crash in anybody's terms, let's face it, Nigel. You know what I mean?
Well, not if, not Richard. Not Richard. If you're a German car manufacturer or a French wine producer, and if your biggest market in the world is the United Kingdom, the one thing you want, Mrs. Merkel and Hollande, I mean, not that it'll be there after May, obviously, but the one thing you want is you want tariff-free access to your biggest market in the world. And even if they won't give it to us on day one, at some point they're going to have to because of pressure within their own countries. Doesn't that economic logic make sense?
Do you really believe they're going to give up the 4 pillars for Britain, which is leaving and attempting to break up the union? Do you really, tell me the truth now. Do you really believe
I think well, you asked me, so I will answer, Richard. I mean, give me a chance, old son. I mean, let me tell you, one of those pillars, free movement, I think Schengen, and we will talk about this in a subsequent programme, I think Schengen is now in real trouble. Why? Because after that atrocity that took place in Berlin, when the most wanted man in Europe was able, because of the Schengen zone, to get on a train to France, then to change trains to go to Italy, and then by chance to be caught in northern Italy, that says that Schengen isn't just a mechanism whereby nice people and good people can move freely around the European continent. It is also a means by which bad people and Kalashnikov guns can move. And I think what you're going to see, Richard, in the elections that are coming up, we've got the Netherlands in March, we've got France in April and May, we've got Germany coming up in September, and probably an Italian general election before the summer, and I think you're going to see a lot of political parties saying that we've got to get rid of Schengen. So actually, I think the whole European Union structure is in very, very deep trouble. There is Eurosceptic thought and growth of parties in every country in the EU.
But are you actually friends with Beppe Grillo, the Italian now? I mean, it's a kind of...
I'm very friendly with Beppe. I had a long chat with Beppe. Yesterday. Today. I had a long chat with Beppe Grillo.
The thing about Schengen, yesterday I did listen. I'm a fan, and I heard you praising Switzerland, but I'm pretty sure Switzerland is in the Schengen area, is it not?
But Richard, they've just voted against it in a referendum, so their government, rather like our government, had better do what people ask for. Anyway, Richard, I thank you. A good fun exchange, 8.5 out of 10. That's the highest genuine mark that Jeremy Corbyn has got this evening. And I wonder how Karen in Chipping Norton rates Corbyn, the Labour Party's future and his leadership.
Nigel, I feel like I've got through the pulp, but you can't give me enough time tonight to tell you what I need to speak to you about. I cannot wait to tell you that Jeremy Corbyn has completely and utterly lost the plot. If he thinks, I would like to take Jeremy Corbyn and Tim Farron and whoever else thinks that immigration is a good thing, I'd like to take them to work with me, because I work for an airline and I spend my life in Europe. I've been to Brussels hundreds of times, and let me tell you, nobody's travelling there now. The Sheraton Hotel that we used to stay in is closing down because nobody wants to go there. It used to be full. I experience shocking things around Europe all the time, usually caused by just feral immigrants who have come into the country and they shouldn't be there. They're illegal. And last week in Milan, I saw something that really shocked me. If you ask any crew member who spends time in Europe, they will tell you that immigration needs to be stopped immediately, and we only need to take people who have been thoroughly checked and who we feel that we need in our country. And anybody else should be deported immediately.
Karen, certainly Brussels has changed, and you're right, as a destination, be it for weekends or be it for holidays, frankly, things have fallen off a cliff. This place has got absolutely huge social problems. I thank you. Well, my final thought on all of this is that it's not just the key issue of immigration, where Jeremy Corbyn is completely cast adrift from traditional Labour voters. It is worse than that. It is deeper. It is more fundamental. He simply doesn't come across as being patriotic, which the vast majority of old Labour voters are. And I stood behind him in St Paul's Cathedral at the Battle of Britain anniversary service. He wouldn't sing the national anthem. He can't bring himself to praise the actions of the British Army. He wants to give away the Falkland Islands. You know, he's a North London socialist that mix in a rarefied, very rarefied social set. He is just miles away from the feelings and emotions of so much of that Labour vote. I do genuinely think that the Labour Party is in big, serious trouble. The party is not fit for purpose. There is now room for a challenger. I can only give Mr Corbyn a generous 2 out of 10. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock in London. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but next, it's Clive Bull.